Hello and welcome, it's Connor here from Luxia Smart Homes, and today I'm going to be telling you everything you need to know about smart lighting. I'm going to be covering all of the different types of smart lighting, from smart bulbs to switches to relays. I'm going to be telling you everything you need to know about them, what they do, what the key differences are, and when you should be using them. I'll also be covering some of the smaller details that are still really important when doing your smart lighting, and that is the naming conventions, the variety of different sensors that come with smart lighting, and the best way to control it all. First things first, make sure you keep everything local. That means stay away from any and all cloud devices. Cloud devices are quite simply bad news, and they will cause you problems at some point down the line. The main issue with cloud devices is their reliance on third parties. Now, when you buy a cloud device, technically you don't even own it, because the company that you bought it from could discontinue the product at any time. They could introduce a subscription plan, or they can enforce a sudden price increase on an existing subscription plan. Now, you might be thinking that if you stick with the bigger companies like Google or Amazon, you'll be safe, because companies like that aren't going to just discontinue products or increase prices. Of course they are. They're actually the worst ones for it. Google love to discontinue a product, meaning you have to then buy their latest product, which is very handy, or you have to go and buy a totally new product that does something similar from a different manufacturer, so you're spending more money either way. And Ring recently increased their subscription plan by 43%, forcing users to either pay that increased subscription, cancel the subscription, meaning that they lose out on certain features now, or they've had to break away from the Ring ecosystem and buy completely new products, again costing a lot of money. Either way, the options aren't very good, and they usually involve you forking out even more money for something that you've already purchased. So if you own a cloud device, well, you don't. The company that you bought it from actually owns you. So please stay away from cloud devices and keep things local. So what should you be looking for if I've just told you to stay away from all cloud devices and basically all main manufacturers? Well, what you want to be doing is you want to be using a system such as Home Assistant. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably using Home Assistant or you're planning on using it. And Home Assistant is brilliant because it can incorporate a large number of devices into a single platform. So everything can be controlled through one application and everything can talk together regardless of manufacturer. What's even better is with a platform like Home Assistant, you own your smart home. You have complete ownership and control over everything as long as the devices you're using are not cloud devices. So if you have a load of locally controlled devices connected to Home Assistant, everything is running within your four walls of your home. There's no third parties involved. Devices aren't reaching out to third party servers. There's no risk of having a discontinued product or having to pay some random subscription that's just being introduced or having to pay even more money on a subscription than what you were. None of that matters because you own everything and you control everything. It is yours forever. Now, when it comes to smart lighting, you want to start by deciding what protocol you want to use. And what I mean by protocol is what thing would you like the devices to communicate over? Do you want it to be Wi-Fi, ZigG, Z-Wave? The most common one that people have heard of is Wi-Fi because we use that in our daily lives. Now, the common misconception with Wi-Fi is that it actually requires an internet connection, but that's not true. A Wi-Fi device doesn't necessarily need an internet connection in order to operate as designed. Many Wi-Fi devices can just operate within your local network without needing to reach out to the outside world or utilize an internet connection, making them even more secure and reliable. Now, a great example of Wi-Fi devices is Shelly. Shelly manufacture loads of different products, so they're bound to have what you're looking for. And what's great with Shelly is you can decide whether or not you want the device to have a cloud connection. So when you're setting it up in the Shelly app, it will ask you if you want to enable a cloud connection or not. And if you don't have to enable it. So you are still in control of that device and it's not reaching out to any kind of third-party servers. What's great about Shelly is that it allows you to do this per device. So if you only want to access particular devices when away from home, then you can do that. You can make some of them connected to the cloud and some of them just pure local control. And that is one of the reasons I really like Shelly, because they give you a lot of control over the products and the devices that you purchase. Now, if you are using a platform such as Home Assistant, then you don't need to enable this cloud connection on the Shelly devices if you don't want to, because any device connected to Home Assistant will be accessible remotely if you've configured a remote connection for Home Assistant, but that is for a separate video. Now, Wi-Fi can be great for smaller setups, but I personally try to stay away from it because it uses a star topology and it drains battery devices really quick. Another thing to keep in mind is you will need a strong home network in order to run a lot of Wi-Fi devices. Now, if you've only got a handful of them, that's fine, but if you're running, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 devices, then you're going to want a more robust network. My network is set up with a UniFi Dream Machine. There is a 16-port UniFi switch, multiple UniFi access points. It's all configured using VLANs. There's firewall rules in place to make sure certain devices only have access to certain elements of the network. It is a very robust network and it is well configured. However, I still like to just stay away from Wi-Fi devices because I like to run my smart home on a separate protocol, which we'll get to in a second. Now, personally, I prefer to use ZigBee, and there are a couple of different reasons I prefer ZigBee, but one of them is that it uses a mesh topology, meaning devices don't just have to communicate back to the main hub in order to work, they can communicate through each other. So if a device is struggling to get back to the hub, or in the world of ZigBee we call it a coordinator, then it can jump through other devices in order to get back to the coordinator. So that's great if you've got a device that's maybe in your garage that's too far away from the house. You can put some other devices in between to allow those devices in the garage to reach the main coordinator. Now, these devices are called routers and they have to be mains powered. Okay, so it needs to be like a smart plug or a smart bulb. And those kinds of devices are the routers that allow the other devices to jump through them in order to get to the coordinator. Now, the other type of device within a ZigBee network is the end device, and these are battery-powered devices that are usually motion sensors or contact sensors, and these devices cannot act as routers. So other devices in a ZigBee network can't go through your motion sensor to get back to the coordinator because they are an end device and they run on battery. Okay, you must use a router which is mains powered, such as smart plugs and smart bulbs, and they will strengthen your ZigBee network and they will allow your end devices to get to the coordinator if they're a little bit too far away. Now, one of the major downsides to ZigBee is that it runs on the same frequency as Wi-Fi. So if you haven't got things configured correctly, your ZigBee network and your Wi-Fi network could interfere with each other, and this could cause some connection issues and dropouts across your network. Meaning bulbs might not turn on, switches might not work, motion sensors might not detect you properly. So you need to make sure that things are correctly configured when using a ZigBee network. Now, if you want to make sure that your ZigBee network is configured correctly and that it is going to play nicely with your Wi-Fi network, then take a look at this image which shows the channels for ZigBee and Wi-Fi. This image perfectly illustrates the channels used by ZigBee and Wi-Fi and where they overlap. Now, the key to creating a stable environment is ensuring that your ZigBee channel does not overlap your existing Wi-Fi channel. For example, if our Wi-Fi channel was set to channel 1, we would set our ZigBee channel to channel 25. Now, the reason that we're not using ZigBee channel 26 is because most manufacturers only support up to channel 25. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is your neighbours. Even though our Wi-Fi might be running on channel 1, our neighbour might be running their Wi-Fi on channel 11, meaning we can no longer use ZigBee channel 25 as our neighbour will be interfering with that channel. Instead, we would have to use a ZigBee channel between 16 and 19 as this is out of the way of our network and it's also out of the way of our neighbour's Wi-Fi network. So it's all about just doing a proper scan and making sure that when you're setting up your ZigBee network, you are setting it up in a channel that is free from your existing Wi-Fi channel and your neighbour's existing Wi-Fi channels. Now, if you want to, you can rearrange your own Wi-Fi channels to better suit your ZigBee network, but that's more technical, but if you know how to do that, then that is an option that you can do. You can reconfigure your Wi-Fi network to accommodate for your ZigBee network. Now, there are free apps that you can download on your mobile that will allow you to analyze your surrounding Wi-Fi networks. Just look for a Wi-Fi Analyzer app, and when you download it, you'll be able to do a scan which will show all of the Wi-Fi networks in your area and what channel they are running on. Now another great option for your protocol is ZWave, which is very similar to ZigBee, except it doesn't run on the same frequency as Wi-Fi. It runs on its own little frequency out of the way, meaning it is not as susceptible to interference as a ZigBee or Wi-Fi might be. However, there are fewer ZWave products on the market, so it heavily limits your choice in what you can buy. Now this is because of the strict manufacturing guidelines that must be followed when making ZWave products. They also need a ZWave certification before being allowed on the market. Now, although this heavily limits the amount of products on the market, it does mean the products that are available will always be compatible with each other. It doesn't matter if they are made by different manufacturers, they will still be compatible because of the strict manufacturing guidelines that are in place. Whereas the ZigBee protocol can actually be modified by the manufacturer, so they can slightly alter how the ZigBee protocol works, meaning certain ZigBee products might not be compatible with each other if they are made by different manufacturers. So this is something that you should be checking when buying ZigBee. But simply, if you want a small, easy to set up smart home, then go down the Wi-Fi route. If you're not planning on making a huge smart home, then Wi-Fi is perfectly fine to use, and it will just run on your Wi-Fi router, so you don't need any extra hub or anything like that. And it's mostly plug and play, so Wi-Fi is what you are going to be after for a nice, easy, small setup. Just keep in mind that if it is a battery Wi-Fi device, the batteries will drain significantly faster than if it was a ZigBee or Z-Wave device. Now, if you're thinking of creating a more advanced smart home that can accept a wide range of products, I would go with ZigBee. Just keep in mind that you will have to get a bit technical when setting things up, and it requires a bit more effort than what Wi-Fi would. But there is a wide range of products available, and it uses the mesh topology, so you can really strengthen your network by adding in routers like smart plugs or smart bulbs. Plus, you have the benefit of battery devices, which will last significantly longer than a battery Wi-Fi device. Now, the reason for this is because ZigBee devices will actually go to sleep. ZigBee battery devices will go to sleep when they're not in use. So if motion hasn't been detected for a long period of time, the device will go to sleep and it will put itself on basically a low power mode, so it will stop consuming battery. Whereas Wi-Fi devices don't do this. They are just constantly working hard all of the time, draining that battery. Now, very similar to ZigBee, we have Z-Wave. Z-Wave has the added benefit of running on its own frequency, so you've not got all of the hassle of configuring your networks and making sure things aren't interfering with your Wi-Fi. You don't need to worry about that. It's not as technical as what you need to get with ZigBee, and it will be much stronger and more robust and more reliable, but you will have a significantly less amount of products to choose from due to the strict guidelines that Z-Wave products need to go through in order to reach the market. Now, all of this is a very simple conclusion, just summarized, okay, very simple points. If you are getting into smart homes and you're starting to look into smart lighting or other smart products and you're debating on what protocol to use, I would do a significant amount of research before making your final decision. Like I say, this is just very brief and summarized from my point of view, but go out there, have a little look. There are tons of videos online, loads of different articles that you can read. Research, make sure you're choosing what is right for you and your smart home. Smart bulbs, a product I would recommend you stay away from. Now, smart bulbs are all fun and games until something goes wrong with your smart home. Now, maybe you didn't configure your ZigBee network correctly like I told you to, and it was conflicting with your Wi-Fi, and now you're having interference causing devices to drop out. Or perhaps your coordinator has died and it needs replacing, so now there is no way for your bulbs to communicate properly. Either way, if you're using smart bulbs, you now have no control over your lighting. All of your bulbs will not work through your app, they won't work with your voice assistant. That's it, they're done until you fix the issue that is happening with your smart home. Now, the biggest problem with smart bulbs is that they are 100% wireless, okay? So they talk to the coordinator over the air to receive messages on when to turn off and on, when to dim, when to change colour. It's all completely wireless, so if there is a problem with that wireless connection, you lose total control of your bulbs. Now, another problem with smart bulbs is their need for constant power. Now, a smart bulb needs to be powered all of the time. You cannot kill the power to a smart bulb, otherwise when an automation kicks in or you go to use your voice assistant or your mobile app, it won't work. It's not going to turn on or turn off or do what you want it to do because you've killed the power to the bulb. So your normal switch needs to constantly be in the on position. And when you've got guests over, or maybe even your family, chances are they're going to flick that switch. They're going to kill the power to the bulb. Of course they are. That's what they're used to. Most people aren't used to living in a smart home. They see a light switch, they want to turn the light on, they press the light switch. It's common sense. You can't blame them for that, okay? But it is a regular thing that will happen if you're using smart bulbs, and it's annoying when an automation tries to kick in and it doesn't work, or if you try to use a voice assistant or whatever it might be. If you've killed the power to that bulb, it's not going to work anymore. So that is another annoyance with smart bulbs. So to try and combat this problem, what most people do is they replace their regular switch with a smart switch. But this smart switch needs to be wireless because we've already discussed that the bulb needs constant power. So what you do is you remove your existing regular switch and you put the wiring into a Wago, so you essentially constantly send power to the smart bulb. You then put that back in the black box, and then you put your new fancy smart switch over the top of it and cover everything up, okay? So now all of your wiring is connected together in the black box, giving constant power to the bulb, and you have your wireless smart switch on the wall. Problem is, your switch is now wireless and your bulb is now wireless, so everything is now 100% wireless. And if that wireless connection fails, something goes wrong, you again have lost complete control of your lighting. At least when you had your regular switch on the wall, what you can do is you can power cycle the bulb, so you can turn it off for a bit and then turn it back on, and the bulb will come on, alright? More smart bulbs will come on after a power outage. But as we discussed, a lot of people, family, guests, whoever, will flick that switch and kill power to the bulb, so automations won't work, and it won't work when you want it to. So it's a bit of a nightmare, as you can see. There's no real solution to smart bulbs. It's just trying to make it work as best it can. But yeah, they're a bit of a headache when you start getting into it, so if you can, I would avoid smart bulbs. Now there is a glimmer of hope in all of this, and that glimmer of hope is called binding. Now when you bind a switch directly to a bulb, you are essentially saying this switch can talk directly to this bulb without the need of a coordinator. So even if there is a bit of interference, even if your coordinator goes offline, even if your whole smart home, has a problem and shuts down, it doesn't really matter because your switch is bound to your bulb. So your switch is talking directly to the bulb. The only problem is both devices need to support binding, and binding isn't very popular amongst manufacturers. And even if you do find a device that supports binding, it probably needs to be the same manufacturer. So if you've got a Philips Hue bulb, you will need to use a Philips Hue switch in order to get access to that feature. So a little bit of hope there, but still, I would just stay away from bulbs. Now, the one and only exception that I really have to smart bulbs is when you're using them outside. And the reason that I have an exception here is because you can use colour. Now, colour is another reason that you might use bulbs inside. If you want to have warm and cool white, or if you want to have RGB, the full colour spectrum, then you might want to put them inside. But in all honesty, from my experience, when people do this, we install the bulbs, they've got colour control, they play around with it on the app, and they go, oh, it's blue, and oh, now it's green, and oh, now it's red, and it's all fun and games, and then a week later, they never touch it. Okay, and they don't touch it for the rest of their lives. It's a fun little gimmick that you kind of play around with when you first get it, and maybe you have guests over and you go, oh look, I can change the colour of my living room. But that's about it, okay? It costs a lot of money, it can cause some problems, and it's just more of a gimmick. So colour changing bulbs I reserve for outside of the home, because outside it's not just a gimmick, you are going to use them, and you're going to use them on a regular basis. You can use them to match in with decorations throughout the year. So at Halloween you can light up your house in a different colour. At Christmas you can match it with the Christmas lights that you might have outside. There is actual practical uses for coloured bulbs outside, and you're going to be getting your money's worth. Inside, not so much. Now, smart switches are a much better option when it comes to smart lighting. You are replacing the switch instead of the bulb, which means you can use your existing wiring. This means you can just use the switch like you normally would. If a family member or a guest comes over and they just flick the light switch like they would in any other home, Doesn't matter, they can do that. The light will still turn on or off as you would expect. You just have the addition of a mobile app to control your lights or your voice assistant to control your lights, and then you can build your lights into automations. So you can still do all of your motion sensor automations. When you walk in a room it comes on, and when you leave it turns off. It just means you can also use the switch like a normal switch. So it is guest friendly. Now this is because smart switches will just utilize your existing wiring, so they're still just breaking the circuit between the bulb like a regular switch would, except they've also got a little transmitter inside of them that allows them to talk to your smart home hub to work in automations and work with your voice assistant and connect to a mobile app. So you get the best of both worlds. You get all of the cool smart home stuff while still maintaining the regular light switch, which can be used by guests and family members. Smart switches really are one of the best options when it comes to smart lighting. Yes, you lose out on the fancy colour control, but like I discussed earlier, people don't really use that anyway. They use it for the first week, they show off to their friends when they come over, and that's about it. It ends up usually being a waste of money, and people tend to regret getting smart bulbs, especially colour bulbs, because they cost a lot of money. With a smart switch, you get to turn your lighting on and off, and if you've got a dimmable switch and dimmable bulbs, you can still dim your lighting. Again, you can dim it using the switch, dim it using your voice, dim it using an app, dim it through automations. Whatever you want, you've got the best of all of the worlds. Just stick with smart switches. Now if you know how to check your existing wiring and you know what you're looking for in terms of the neutral, then that's great, you must be a qualified electrician. However, if you're not a qualified electrician and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, don't even attempt to take that switch off the wall. Okay, don't fiddle around with electricity, it is dangerous, it can kill you, alright, it's not a joke. Please get a qualified electrician, get them to come in, check things over for you and install the switches when you purchase them. Now smart relays are another great option when it comes to smart lighting, and they work in a very similar way to smart switches. The only difference is with a smart relay, you're not actually replacing anything, you're actually integrating the relay into your existing setup. Now a smart relay is actually wired into the circuit either behind the light switch or in the ceiling above the light fitting. Now, depending on where you put the relay will depend on your wiring and the space that you have available. If there is no space behind the switch, then you'll have to put it where the light is instead, in the ceiling. Now that's a bit more awkward because you either have to go up into the loft or you have to take the lighting fixture down and try and get it all wired up and then push back in the ceiling. It's a bit of a chew on, so if you can get it behind your light switch then that is absolutely perfect, but if not it will have to go where the light fitting is instead. Now before buying a smart relay, you need to make sure it is compatible with your existing wiring. Again, a smart relay, just like a smart switch, might need a neutral, it might not need a neutral, so verify this and make sure you are buying the correct product. It will tell you if it needs a neutral or not in either the product name or the product description. And again, if you're not a qualified electrician, don't touch anything electrical. Don't take a switch off a wall, don't take your lights down, leave it alone. Electricity is dangerous, it can and it will kill you. Please get a qualified electrician to verify your wiring and install your relays. Something else to mention with smart relays and also smart switches is you can use any light fitting. So if you've got a really fancy chandelier that you want to be able to control, you can do that with a smart switch and a smart relay because they just work with your existing wiring. You're not having to change any bulbs out or anything like that, you're just integrating something into the existing circuit. So if you have a really fancy light fitting, a really nice chandelier that you don't want to get rid of or you don't want to replace, then you don't have to. Just get a smart switch or a smart relay and it will work with any light fitting. Now we've discussed the main lighting elements, so we can talk about the ambient lighting, and I am of course referring to LED strip. Now LED strip is really popular in modern homes, with most people installing it under their kitchen cabinets. Now LED strip is not smart on its own. In fact, most people who own LED strip probably have it wired to a standard switch with absolutely no smart controls involved. Now there are three main components to LED strip. You obviously have the LED strip itself, you have the controller, and then you have the power supply. LED strip comes in a wide variety of styles, but I'm just going to be addressing the fundamentals and the things that you need to know to get started. The LED strip that you should be buying depends on what you're using it for. The most important thing to take note of is the colour chips, as this will determine what your LED strip is capable of, and it will also determine the controller that you're going to have to purchase. You'll all have seen the abbreviations RGB, RGBW and RGBWW, but you might not know what these stand for. Well, to start with, RGB stands for red, green, blue, and these are the colour chips that the LED strip has. So RGB strip, red, green, blue, means that the strip can colour mix between these three colours, allowing it to create over 16 million different colours. RGBW does exactly the same thing as our RGB strip, except it now has an independent white chip, allowing the strip to create a purer and brighter white tone. And finally, we have RGBWW, which again, very similar to our RGBW strip, except this can create a warm white, allowing you to create a cozier environment. If you aren't bothered about how accurate your white tones are, or if you're just not going to be using white at all, then stick with RGB. It's cheaper than the other variants, and if you're not bothered about whites, and if you're not using them at all, then it doesn't matter. However, if you are going to be using white in your LED strip, even if you're not bothered about the accuracy of that white tone, I would still advise getting RGBW or even better RGBWW. RGB strip just does not produce a nice white colour and the light output is less. So just trust me on this one, if you're going to be using whites, whether it's cool white, warm white, get yourself RGBWW. It is the superior strip and you will not regret purchasing it. Now you've decided on your strip, you will need to decide on the controller. Now, just like the strip, the controller will have these abbreviations on them. So if you're purchasing RGBWW strip, you will need to be purchasing an RGBWW controller. If you were to only purchase an RGB controller, then you would not be able to use your independent warm and cool white chips. So it is really important that you make sure these two things match when buying your strip and your controller. Now, controllers can run on Wi-Fi, ZigG or ZWave, just like any other smart device can. So again, it is really important that you are making sure this matches with the other devices in your home. So if you're running ZigBee primarily, then make sure you are getting a ZigBee controller. All of this information should be in either the product title or the product description. So before buying anything, make sure that all of this matches. Finally, you need a power supply to make it all work. Now, the power supply that you need will depend on the type and length of strip that you have purchased. Now, LED strip typically comes in 12 volt and 24 volt versions, so if you have 12 volt strip, then you need to be purchasing a power supply that outputs at 12 volts. Note that this is also true for the controller, as controllers can come in 12 volt and 24 volt versions, so make sure that this also matches. The length of your LED strip is also important, as power supplies have a limited wattage. To calculate this, you would do the wattage of the power supply divided by the wattage of the LED strip. The answer that you get is the total length in meters that you can run using that power supply. So a 200 watt power supply divided by a 12 watt strip equals 16.6, meaning we can only run 16.6 meters of LED strip on this power supply. It is more beneficial if you can give yourself a little bit of headroom. So if the power supply is capable of doing 16.6 meters, try not to max it out at 16.6, maybe only run 15.6 meters. Okay, so give yourself a little bit of headroom there so you're not maxing out the power supply. A good reason to do this is because if your power supply is too weak, then you will begin to experience what is known as voltage drop. Initially, your LED strip will look perfectly fine from the end in which it's connected to the power supply. However, eventually, when you start to run over the length that the power supply is capable of supplying power to, your LEDs will begin to get progressively dimmer until eventually they just don't come on at all. And this is what is known as voltage drop. This is just the power supply reaching its limit. It cannot physically give the LED strip any more power, so that's that. You either need to buy a new power supply that is capable of powering the length of your LED strip, or if you want to get a bit more technical, you can do a bit of voltage injection just before the voltage drop occurs to give the LED strip a bit of a boost and supply the rest of the strip with enough power. In short, you want to determine the type of LED strip that you need. Is it RGB, is it RGBW, or is it RGBWW? You then want to select a controller that matches this, and you also want to make sure that the controller is matching the voltage of your strip. Is it 12 volts or is it 24 volts? Again, all of this should be written within product titles or product descriptions. The controller should also be running on the same protocol as your other lights. So is this Wi-Fi, is it ZigBee, or is it ZWave? Again, it just needs to match in with what the rest of your home is running on. And finally, you want to run some power calculations to make sure that the power supply you are purchasing is strong enough to power your LED strip. And again, making sure that the power supply matches the voltage of your strip. Is it 12 volts or is it 24 volts? Now we've got everything local, we've got our protocol decided, and you've decided whether or not you want to use bulbs, switches or relays, we can start thinking about the accessories that come with all of that. So our presence sensors and our contact sensors, all of the different things that we can implement to create automations that we can use to automatically turn lights on and off around the home. So we've mentioned presence sensors and contact sensors. A presence sensor will detect you when you enter a room, and a contact sensor is normally placed on a door or a window, so when that door is opened, it will do something. In this case, it might turn on a light. Now, another type of sensor is a lux sensor, and a lux sensor will detect how bright it is in a room. It is a light level sensor. So you can build this into automations, so you can say when the presence sensor detects somebody in the room, check the lux sensor, and if the light level is below a certain level, then turn on the light. But if it is above a certain level, then don't turn on the light. So essentially, if there is enough sunlight coming into the room, then don't turn the light on because it's bright enough and we can see. So it's clever because it's not wasting energy and it's not turning lights on and off unnecessarily. Now, you will have noticed that I have said presence sensor and not motion sensor. Now, these are two different products, and a presence sensor is more reliable than a motion sensor. It is also more expensive, not by much, and it is definitely worth it due to the reliability that it offers. Now, motion sensors use passive infrared, so they're normally known as PIR sensors, and this works by detecting the infrared radiation that is given off by body heat. Now, the problem with this is that in environments that are smoky or dusty or have a really high temperature, passive infrared sensors can start to fail. They can either give off false readings or they can just stop giving out any readings at all because they get confused. Not only this, but they have a much shorter detection range, so you'll have to be much closer to the sensor in order for it to pick you up. A presence sensor or millimeter wave sensor emits microwave pulses and analyzes the reflected signals to detect changes in movement. These sensors are capable of measuring distance, speed, the angle of an object, and presence, making them much more reliable than your typical motion sensor. Presence sensors also have a greater detection range, with most presence sensors being able to detect up to 10 meters away, whereas a standard motion sensor can only do a few meters. PIR sensors are cheaper than presence sensors, but as we've just discussed, there are reasons for that. Presence sensors have a much greater detection range and they can detect really small movements. So even in rooms like this office, when I'm sat at the desk, the light will never turn off on me because it knows that I'm here. Even if I am just sitting typing or doing very little movement, it knows that I'm here. Whereas a PIR sensor or a motion sensor would fail to detect me after a prolonged period of time of me sitting at this desk, and it would end up turning the light off on me. I know that because the sensor in this room used to be a motion sensor, but now it's a presence sensor and it has never failed me. So although a presence sensor might be more expensive than a motion sensor, it is 100% worth the cost because you will have a more reliable outcome. The other type of sensor is a contact sensor, and these don't have as much of a use case as what a presence sensor would have. Contact sensors are mainly used on maybe garage doors or on loft hatches is another great example. So if it's on a loft hatch, you go to enter the loft. As soon as you pull open that hatch, it will turn the light on and you can go around and do whatever you want to do. And then when you're finished, you come back down, you close the hatch, and then the light immediately turns off. So you're not forgetting to turn the light off when you leave the loft. It just turns on as soon as you open the hatch, and it turns off again as soon as you close it. But other than that, there aren't other many use cases that I would have for contact sensors. Garage doors, again, might be a good one. So when you open up the garage door, the light automatically turns on. But again, other than that, there aren't as many use cases for contact sensors as there are present sensors. Now, before you go running off to buy yourself some sensors, make sure that they are compatible with everything else. Make sure that they're running over the protocol that you have chosen. So if you've decided to go with ZigBee, make sure you are buying ZigBee sensors. If it's Wi-Fi, make sure they're Wi-Fi. If it's Z-Wave, make sure they're Z-Wave, right? Just make sure it's compatible with whatever else you have in your home. Now finally, one of the most important things on this whole video is the naming convention of your devices. So how you name things, and this might sound really obvious, especially if you're using a more plug-and-play system, because you would always give your devices recognizable names, such as living room lamp or bathroom spotlights. However, if you're using a platform such as Home Assistant, then it's a lot easier to kind of neglect your naming convention, and after a while it can become very, very confusing. Now, there's no set way of naming devices. You can do it however you want. They are unique and personal to you and your setup. Just make sure you are following it for all of your devices and you're using something that is easily recognizable. Now, for me, what I sometimes do is I like to do brand, floor of house, room, and device. So for example, a Philips Hue switch in the master bedroom would be Philips upstairs master bedroom switch. Okay, so this clearly identifies the device, where the device is, and who manufactured it. So I can get a lot of information just from the name of the device itself. Again, you might not like this, you might not want to put the manufacturer in, you might not even want to put what type of device it's in. Again, doesn't matter, alright? You can do it however you want to do it. That's the beauty of naming conventions, but just make sure that it's really obvious and simple to understand, and when you have hundreds of devices, it's still going to make sense. So there we have it, everything that you need to know about smart lighting in one video. Hopefully you found this helpful and hopefully you learned something, especially if you're just starting your smart home journey or you're just looking into smart lighting. Hopefully this is giving you a lot to think about and it is now setting you on the right path. Go away, do some more research, watch some more videos, read some articles, okay? Try and learn as much as you can before buying products and before kind of getting into it, because once you start, and especially if you start down the wrong path, it can be very difficult to come back from that because you end up spending a lot of money and it costs even more money to correct it. So do your research, make sure that what you're purchasing is right for you and your smart home, and other than that, have fun, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. So subscribe so you don't miss it, and leave a like to let me know that you enjoyed. But until the next video guys, I will see you later.